born in Santurce and raised in El Barrio in Manhattan, in New York City. Professionally, I am a physician. I am board certified in 4 different specialties, and I've got deep experience in the corporate business environment. I was fortunate to have a terrifically exciting career at the Centers for Disease Control in the Epidemic Intelligence Service, and subsequent to that, a 30-year experience as a senior executive physician for the IBM company, worldwide, supporting about 1 million people, employees and families, and hundreds of workplaces in over 70 countries. So I've got lots and lots of in the field global experience. I retired, quote unquote, from IBM at the end of 2015. I started my own LLC, and I do extensive consulting in healthcare, health services, particularly in health data analytics and technology, including artificial intelligence. So that's me.
Since we're going in the order of age, I'll go next, Doctor. My classmate, Martín Sepúlveda, ladies and gentlemen. Anyway, I'm Gil Casellas. I'm also a member of the class of 1974, one of the co-founders of Despierta Boricua. And I'm happy that Martín mentioned Santurce, because 3 Casellas brothers left Santurce in the 1890s to go to Tampa, Florida. And I know Maria is from Tampa. And they were among a handful, literally, of Puerto Ricans in a city that was predominantly Cuban, Spanish, and somewhat Italian. And they worked in the cigar industry. And so I was born and raised in Tampa. When I came to Yale in 1970, I'd never seen snow. But more important, I did not really understand my Puerto Rican identity, in part because I grew up in the Jim Crow South. And so as Eduardo Padrón said yesterday, you know, when he got to Yale, you know, it was either, you were either black or white, you know, it wasn't, there was no understanding of us fitting in this sort of intersection. And so I have always acknowledged the consciousness and commitment and passion that my fellow Despierta Boricua members gave to me and helped me in my career, especially Eduardo and Manuel, who pushed me and gave me that drive. So I left Yale in 1974. I went to the University of Pennsylvania Law School. I had a traditional law firm career, a big firm, became a partner. 1993, I left to join a guy from Little Rock, Arkansas, when he became president, and served in a number of positions, including being the first Latino and first Puerto Rican chairman of the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. My career has been spent in law, in business, and for the last 10 years, I've served on numerous boards. I've been a member of the Board of Trustees at University of Pennsylvania for 25 years, the Prudential Financial Board and advisory boards for Toyota, Comcast, T-Mobile. And so that's what I've been spending my time on. And Martín and I served together on an advisory board for the nursing school at the University of Pennsylvania. So that's when we reconnected several years ago. I'm thrilled to be here and look forward to the discussion.
Perhaps I'm next. Good morning, everyone. I'm Montes, and I wrote it yesterday, but again, I really appreciate that we're doing this. And it's just brought a lot of positive emotions, but also some memories of you know, just life in over time, especially being at Yale. And so I'm Yale class of 92, but I graduated in 1993. So like many Puerto Ricans in general, I took the 5-year route. I'm originally from the South Bronx. So as I tend to say, I'm a boogie down production. And I now live in New East Brunswick over the last 7 years with my wife of 20 years and my son Danilo, who's a first-year student at NYU, and my daughter Sarah, who's a sophomore at East Brunswick High School. And my career trajectory covers over 30 years working in community-based organizations and faith-based organizations, and most of them have been around Latino and anti-poverty and community empowerment initiatives. And so currently I'm the CEO at the Junta de Acción Puertorriqueña, the Puerto Rican Action Board. Our name is officially in Spanish, which I love. And it's in New Brunswick, New Jersey, and we serve 25,000 diverse individuals and families in Central Jersey. And actually, we're in the process of mourning our founder. We're going to turn 50 years this year as well. And Blanquita Valenti, a Puerto Rican pioneer who just died at 87 years old and is an institution in the state of New Jersey, and que en paz descanse. I also have a second career, if you will, because I'm an ordained Christian minister. And so I'm also an adjunct professor since 2014 in several seminaries, teaching on urban ministry. And prior to that, I was working at running some homeless shelters for single men. I also I worked for many years with the Latino Pastoral Action Center, working to help hundreds of churches across the country to create community ministries and programs, not just for Christians, but for the community as a whole. And I also worked at the Edward Hazen Foundation, which as the program officer for youth development. And actually, Edward Hazen Foundation started in New Haven, and Edward Hazen actually donated a building, one of the buildings, to Yale in the 1960s. So there was that connection as well. When I learned that, I was pretty happy to hear that. And then prior to that, in 1993, just before I left, just after I left Yale, I worked at Aspira of New York. And of course, I blame Eduardo Padró for that, because I actually, in between, right after I graduated from college, I was a crime prevention community organizer at the Logan Square Neighborhood Association in Chicago, where I was able to spend time with Mike Reese and Richard Figueroa. It was a wonderful time being over there. And then in between, I took a year off, or shall we say, I was asked to take a year off when I was at Yale in 1990. And again, because of Eduardo, I was able to work the first time at Aspira of New York at the age of 18. I was the legal professions counselor, imagine. And there I got to meet Eduardo's wife, Madeline, who's my comadre, and Manuel's wife, Cruz. And these were amazing, amazing individuals who inspired me also to want to be in this field. And you know, I'll share a little bit later. It also contributed to really saving my life. So that's a little bit about me.
Maria, should I jump in? Hi, everyone. It's great to be here. Thank you to the students for organizing this over the course of these 2 days and for inviting me. You could have had really anybody you wanted on this panel, and you asked me to serve, and I'm really grateful for that opportunity, especially to serve on this panel with everyone else who's on it, who's amazing. My name is Jorge Torres. I am the current dean of Pearson College. What's pretty awesome about this group is I don't have to tell you what a residential college dean does, as I might in other settings, because you all had residential college deans. If you are a Pearsonite, put it in the chat so that we can get a whoop whoop going. I went to Yale. I entered Yale in 1992. I was in another college next door to Pearson, but I tell my students I upgraded residential colleges when I came on duty this last January here as the dean. I was an MB&B student, major at Yale, and on a graduate school track. So I was going to get a PhD and do research. And I decided late, like in my 7th or 8th term of enrollment, I didn't want to do that anymore. But I had met a patent attorney who told me, if you ever decide to pull the eject button or press the eject button in science, you can go in and still be involved in science, but practice law in a way that will really value your STEM training. And that's what I did. So after graduating Yale, I was hired by Jose Montes, small world, to work at Aspira as a health careers counselor. That was my very first job out of Yale at Aspira of New York. And then I went and worked for a legal assistant, as a legal assistant for a time, and then went to the University of Pennsylvania Law School a little bit after Gil Casellas. But I always love to say that Gil was in the brochure for the Penn Law School, and I wrote about him in my essay, and he always says, you know the line, Gil? He always says, and they let you in anyway. And he's being modest, but I took very seriously the task of explaining why it mattered, and him as being sort of the representation of Puerto Rican folk at Penn really mattered to me. I loved Penn. I practiced intellectual property law for 15 years. My jam when I was an attorney was complex patent infringement trials. So I was going all over the country, preparing cases for trial, appearing in court, trying them. Over time, I developed my practice and grew it to start working with investors and entrepreneurs who had some sort of problem that involved intellectual property, patents or otherwise. And I got very curious about what venture capital investors do, and so curious that I started a venture capital firm in New York called Silas Capital, along with one of my clients. And that firm today, 10 years on, is one of the premier investors in early stage consumer brands, some of which are household names, others unfortunately are not, but that's the way the cookie crumbles in venture capital. In 2017, I was moved to do two things that led me to where I am right now. One, given the political climate in this country, I felt that I needed to put my efforts towards diversifying the venture capital industry. Because the lack of representation in that industry is perhaps the worst of all the different industries I've worked in. And so I started doing work with a small nonprofit called HBCU VC, which trains students at HBCUs and some Hispanic serving institutions to support entrepreneurs by providing capital, but also creating innovation communities that help them thrive. The other thing I was moved to do in 2017 was to come back to Yale for the first time and engage in a really meaningful way with students by teaching a residential college seminar in venture capital. I taught that for a couple of years, and my heart was really moved towards wanting to be more engaged with students. I put the word out on the streets that I was interested in spending more time working with students. And if an opportunity to do that came up, to let me know. And thanks to Eileen Galvez, who I think is on the chat here, I heard about the opening at Pearson. I applied, and luckily I was invited to come and serve 450 plus Pearsonites, these days scattered across 18 time zones from Beijing to Hawaii, who are affiliated with the college and support them in a range of academic and personal and whole life matters. So that's me in a nutshell. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. My name is Maria Ramos. I am Silliman class of 96, and I'm not quite sure how I ended up on this panel. I am the oldest daughter of a gentleman who has always been my hero and passed away last year. I was born in Puerto Rico, and we moved to the United States before I ended up in Tampa, we went to Wisconsin. It was my first, probably the reason I remember it so much is because I never realized that there was such a thing as a minority, having come from the island and having lived in the island. And also one of the things is having lived in the island, I was a very proud Puerto Rican. I come and I lived in Wisconsin, and all of a sudden everybody wants to make me a Mexican. Not that there is anything wrong with being Mexican. I'm Puerto Rican, I'm not Mexican. Don't confuse me. Long story short, we moved to Tampa, Florida, which is, as everybody knows, Florida can break your heart on election night. And I was always used to probably being the only person in the room that was Puerto Rican. As Gil will tell you, a lot of Cubans, so everybody thinks you're Cuban when you speak Spanish. But I also, even though I think Gil was born in Ybor City, I lived on the outskirts of Tampa, so I lived more in the rural areas, the Brandon area, which is even less at that time Hispanic. So my first trip to Yale, I decided to go to Yale, and I had never even visited. So to me, it was a culture shock, but it was also a place where I think I found myself, and I found like-minded individuals. And I think those individuals, even though maybe they were just friends, went to influence who I am and the decisions that I would make later on in life. And I think Yale, Despierta Boricua, people like Israel Flores and other alumni that I got to meet were people who helped ground me, or people who helped, helped me become who I am. After graduating from Yale in '92, I went to the University of Miami. I received a full scholarship to go to the law school. And that in of itself was a culture shock. Even though obviously Yale is very affluent, and you know that you're going to school with some very affluent alumni, the money that is thrown in Miami is quite interesting, especially at the university. We had people who would just go to law school in all these fancy cars, and you're like, really? So I went to law school in Miami, and at the time when I wanted to practice international law or wanted to be a lawyer, having seen a lot of issues with my parents growing up with denial of access to what we call access to justice, due a lot to the economic situation. I wanted to try to be a lawyer who could be there to be a voice for many different people. So I practiced in Miami for a little while. I didn't like Miami too much. And then I moved back to Tampa. I did litigation for the longest time, and I did not find any passion in litigation, and especially civil litigation. I think there's a difference between doing civil litigation and doing representing public interest, because when you have a cause, you have a passion, you have a belief in something. When you're doing civil litigation, people are fighting about money. And that to me didn't inspire me, that to me didn't move me. And lots of times a good result is when you've arrived at a compromise, and when you arrive at a compromise, a good compromise, most of the time someone's had to give up something and people aren't happy. So I remember there being a mentor at the law firm I was working, and she knew that I was interested in employment litigation, but she also knew that one of the partners needed assistance in immigration. She was going through a health crisis. And so I was given the opportunity to maybe switch from what I was doing to doing immigration. And I found my passion. I love practicing immigration. It's something that there's a lot of angst in it, in the sense that, you're dealing with people's lives, but at the same time, I've never seen the most grateful clients. And, I do a lot of corporate work, but I also do a lot of pro bono work. I'm a member of the American Immigration Lawyers Association, and we have an advocacy task. And so we're constantly trying to lobby the government for immigration reform. And probably the last 4 years have been some of the hardest 4 years for most of my colleagues in the immigration field. And it's just been quite a journey.
Thank you all so much for those answers. I just want to dig a little bit deeper into something all of you touched on, which is identity. And so I know Jorge has a Puerto Rican flag in his LinkedIn. But aside from that, how has your Puerto Rican identity kind of played into specifically your work and your career, if at all?
Yeah, I guess I can, I think for me, I know that this is a career panel, but for me, this is about a journey, right? Where your career happens to be part of what you do. And that was something that for me, when I think about being Puerto Rican, I'm a Puerto Rican, as Jesus Colon wrote, I'm a Puerto Rican in New York, and specifically in the South Bronx. So, you know, and sorry, but at that time it was the U.S. Puerto Rican capital of, and so sorry for Brooklyn and others who think differently, but it was part of my identity, and understanding the history of struggle and poverty, both personally and also with the community at large. And my family was mostly in Puerto Rico. My mom is one of 12, and my father was one of 18, 20. So I had a large family. And so when people would come from my mother's side, because I grew up with my mom, we were the los de allá afuera. And so we were the place that, we were the launch pad for people to come from Puerto Rico to move into the US. And so we had a very clear, I think I knew more about what was happening in Puerto Rico than what was happening in New York or the US at the time. And, you know, I've always gravitated toward issues of Puerto Ricans and other Latinos and African Americans, West Indians. It was, you were Puerto Rican in New York and in the Bronx, but you were urban also. So that was part of the identity, understanding that even when I was young, I knew that I was a mulatto. My mother was a Black Puerto Rican. My father was a white Puerto Rican who denied that his grandmother was born a slave. And so I knew all of that history, and I witnessed all of these Puerto Ricans, not just struggling, but also thriving and serving people and doing this amazing work. And I looked at my elders and I saw what they were doing, and my friend's family, just, you know, just really like, they made me proud to be Puerto Rican. And, you know, my mom and dad, my mom from Guayama and my father from Ciales, you know, they gave from what they didn't have. And I always had that as my Puerto Rican identity, that you give, that you serve, that you love, even if people don't appreciate those things, which took me a while to learn that. And that there was, as a Puerto Rican, you gave back, and you opened doors for people. You just, you were, and you understood that when you are a Puerto Rican, you don't just care for Puerto Ricans. That was part of my identity. I always saw that from Puerto Ricans, that we knew how to love, and it shaped my identity, and it of course shaped my career choices.
I think that for me, one of the things my dad would always say would be like, if you're going to wear a flag or if you're going to identify yourself, make sure that what you're doing well, and you're doing something to make someone proud, so that you don't ruin it for the person that's coming behind you. Don't just wear a flag and say and yell, I'm Puerto Rican, and then go and, I don't know, speed. You know, in Florida, we have lots of people that drive like a maniac down the street. Make sure what you're doing is something that's not going to be held against the person who's coming behind you. So for me, in a law firm, I'm often I'm the only Puerto Rican in my office, but I'm also sometimes, as a woman, I'm the only person in the room. So I'm always remembering that the person that comes behind me, people are always going to compare. They're always going to, you know, if I do something wrong, or if I'm lazy or whatever, they're always going to use it against the person that's coming on up. And so it always, to me, it's always been something by which, like, you have to work hard. you have to do the best job that you can, and always keeping that in mind.
Yeah, I'll just say that what Maria and Jose said really resonated with me. There really is something about Puerto Rican identity that there's this cultural trait of helping other people, being in community, creating community where none exists or where it's been taken away from you. For me, and what Maria said about being the only one in the room also struck me, because I see myself as a pioneer. When I was a graduate, a would-be graduate student in structural biology, there was one other Puerto Rican in that sort of mix. His name is Gabriel Ortiz. I went to high school with him. We went to Yale together. But outside of him, I knew no one. Then in the world of patent law, there were no other patent lawyers I knew at the time who were Puerto Rican. So it was very lonely. And then certainly when I went into venture capital in 2011, I did not know a single Puerto Rican identifying venture capital investor. And today I can name all the ones that are out there that I know, at least in one, maybe two hands. So to answer the question, how that cultural norm and the reality of being the only one came together in my work is that at each chapter of my journey, I've tried to create community for Puerto Ricans, and not just Puerto Ricans, but all people who are overlooked and underestimated and not included, so that they can have a place to feel welcome. Part of it is selfishness, just not wanting to be the only one. But a big part of it for me was political, as a response to history and a response to sort of this reality that we find ourselves in, where there's a lot more work to do to bring up Puerto Ricans and other people around me.
I would pile on to what my Boricua colleagues have shared. I think that it all begins with family, in our culture, and from family to community. And those are our most powerful two inner circles. I didn't think a lot about identity because I grew up in the middle of all of that, in one of the most tumultuous periods in the history of Latinos in New York, and that was in the 1960s. So I began as a community organizer for a group called the Young Lords, which some of you may or may not recognize. And then when I went off to college, before I came to Yale, I was actually at Wesleyan, a little bit up the road in Connecticut. And I was recruited there by Manny Del Valle. And we cut our teeth on Latino organizing at Wesleyan. So we created the first Latino organization at Wesleyan, and it was called Ajua Campos. You will recognize Campos from Pedro Albizu Campos, and the Ajua is a cry of the Mexican people. And we put that name together because there were three of us there. There were two Boricuas and one Chicano. So he insisted that was going to be what our organization was called. And after turning that place upside down, and many of you may not recall, but the 1960s was not just the Young Lords, but African-American organizations became very strident and visible in our nation at that time. What we did, along with our Black soulmates, was to take over universities and colleges in the spring, in the late 1960s, fighting for real actions against inequities and disparities affecting our people. So when I came to Yale, I was already experienced, and Manny and I, we knew who was going to take the left step and who was going to take the right step, because we had been down that path before. And you know the history. But then I took that, to Harvard, because I left Yale College and I went to the Harvard Medical School. And Harvard Medical School was where Yale was, even worse. And we confronted the dean of the Harvard Medical School at the time, the three of us that were there, and in short order, the matriculation of Latino students increased by about 500% within the space of a year and a half. And that organization, it was called Latinos Unidos, that we created there, went on and has carried on that that tradition. Professionally, looking out for us has been part and parcel of what I've done. I've done lots of work in medicine and public health over the last 12 years at the real pinnacle of science and medicine in our country at the National Academy of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine, and advocated and led lots of things, again, in pursuit of the kinds of things that we've talked about, in everything ranging from cognitive and developmental, social, emotional development of poor children to the forgotten demographic of young adults in our country. And most recently, I led, the sentinel piece of work on the health and well-being of sexual and gender diverse peoples, LGBTQI plus, laying a foundation for transformation in all sectors of society to bring equity and reduce disparities, to those portions of our communities. So when you build these things, as all of you have, and this is for the students, from the inside out, from day one, starting within that nuclear space called the family, and then applying yourselves, as folks have said, you're going to be down the road where we are today, talking to those future generations of folks wondering, how can I make an impact and how can I get to where you folks are? Now, I'll emphasize the point that said, look, when you follow your heart, when you have a deep sense, of faith in the core skills that you have, you can pursue any path. Because you can learn the context, but you can't learn the core skills on the job. So the opportunity is one that excites you, that is going to give you a sense of fulfillment, allow you to apply your skills, and to extend your knowledge in other areas. I would encourage you to go there, because that's how a lot of us got to where we are. I know that's true for Eduardo. I know that's true for Gil. And that sounds like the same story from Maria, and how she got to where she is. And if you take one lesson home today, I think that's it.
There is nothing left to be said. I, as we say in Washington, adopt the remarks of the gentlemen and gentle ladies who have preceded me. The only thing I will add is that, and I'll repeat what I said before, and that is coming to Yale and associating with the students who I did, part of Despierta Boricua, gave me that sense of identity, and it's driven me throughout my career. And I think what's the one inspiring, I guess, impulse is in all that I do is to honor the sacrifices of my ancestors, my grandparents and great-grandparents, as you all have implicitly or explicitly said. And so with that, I will just say thank you to those like Martín and Eduardo again, and Jorge for your kind remarks as well, because you all continue to inspire me in all that you do.
That was beautiful. Thank you all. I'd love to close the bigger space right now just with a final question about what drives each of you and what you would like to leave for the students here and the young Puerto Ricans that are listening to you today and later on.
I think what I would say is that I don't want to be the only one in the room. I want there to be other people like me in the room. And so whatever you can do, if you can help someone out or you can lend a hand to those who are coming up, I think we have an obligation to do so because someone helped us out.
Yeah, my answer is similar. What drives me is that I really enjoy and think that I'm pretty good at helping to bring the best out of other people, whether that's through teaching, mentoring, counseling, advising. And I think, you are all as students at Yale headed into positions of leadership, whether you realize it now or not. An essential component of leadership is bringing out the best in the people you're leading. And so I would encourage you to take that to heart and commit to that, to doing that one-on-one or at scale, however it looks like in your life. And I think if you do that, you will also do what Maria is hoping, is that you will multiply the number of Puerto Ricans that are doing amazing things all around the world.
I'll just jump in briefly and agree with all of that, and also say that two things. One is, I think Martin touched on this, get grounded in whatever it is that you're going to adopt as a profession or career. Get really good at it. That's number one, right? So that's the foundation upon which you build all of the other opportunities that you'll have. Two, when you're in the room, realize that as special as you are, there are people like you behind you who have even greater promise. And I did not mention earlier. I just connected on this Zoom with someone I hired as a lawyer at my law firm 30 some years ago, Arlene Bayo Santiago. Because when I became the hiring partner at that firm, when I joined that firm, I was the only lawyer of color, big law firm in Philadelphia. And when I left, I was the personnel partner and in charge of all hiring and advancement. And 10% of the lawyers when I left were lawyers of color. And it was because I knew I had an obligation, because I was a pioneer in a sense, but I knew I had an obligation not to be the last. Right. So even though I was the first, I could not be the last. And so no matter where you go, you can make a difference, no matter what the setting, whether it's a Fortune 100 boardroom, or it's a university board of trustees, or it's a community setting or a hospital board, you can make a difference. But in order to have the credibility, right, you got to have the skills, and the skills come from your having grounded yourself in whatever skill it is that you adopt as for your career.
Let me leave you with a visual on skills. Think of the capital letter I in its vertical position. Think of the capital letter I in a horizontal position, and think of the capital letter T. I is someone who is incredibly deep in knowledge and expertise in a very narrow domain. And we need those. The horizontal I are people who have working knowledge and vocabularies in a broad array of disciplines. They are multidisciplinarians. And we need multidisciplinarians, particularly since the kinds of major problems we're trying to address in our different fields are complex systems problems. And then there's the letter T. And T is a skill distribution of an individual who is very deep in one area, but is also a multidisciplinarian, not as expert in other areas, but has, working knowledge in other disciplines. And we could probably, all of us, go back, take that visual and identify whether we are a vertical eye, a horizontal eye, or whether we are T people. And those are the kinds, that's the distribution of skill that you're going to have to work through, as you develop, educationally and professionally. So if I ever run into any of you again, I'm going to ask you, well, are you a vertical eye, a horizontal eye, or are you a T person?
Yeah, I have probably a very different experience than everyone in this panel, because I always have worked with mostly Puerto Ricans and Latinos and people of color. I don't know of an organization that I've worked with that's not the case. And so because I've worked in community and in very economically challenging spaces, I would tell you that for those of you who are interested in working in the nonprofit community-based world and you come from Yale, it's a mixed bag having come from Yale, because on the one hand, it opens some doors, but on the other hand, you are a smart Puerto Rican. And in some spaces, that's actually a negative. And I've experienced that, feeling alienated from the community. But my message to those who are interested in doing that work is persevere. Because the truth is that if we don't do it, who will do it? And there are a lot of spaces where good work is being done by other people and other people groups. But when it comes down to it, without the Puerto Rican voice serving Puerto Ricans, it becomes, you're hoping that they understand you. You're the one who understands, you lived it. Now, you may not represent all the Puerto Rican experience, but you are connected to a Puerto Rican experience. So that when I go and I represent La Junta de Acción Puertorriqueña, and I purposely say it that way so that people could understand that, yes, my Spanish is good, and it's good to be Puerto Rican and speak Spanish, that you go into a space and you're in the boardroom, you're talking to people and you represent your people. There's a voice, and never lose that wherever you go, whether it's a small space, whether it's an informal space, yes, there's a burden to be a voice, but whether you like it or not, you're going to be seen, and you heard it already. You're going to be asked or forced to be that voice. And while it may be challenging at times, the truth is that it's rewarding, because I could tell you that as I think about my trajectory and the number of people that I can say that I've helped to grow, to get out of poverty, to appreciate their culture, it's worth it. Even on the tough days, when sometimes you don't have enough money in your organization to run it and you don't know when the next money's coming, but as a Christian, I can tell you God has provided. And I just see the work of all of these people, and I see these Puerto Ricans all throughout the year and their effort. And so that's what motivates me, knowing that I'm not the first one to do it. I'm not the last one to do it, but I can draw on the energy of other people who have succeeded and have made a commitment. And I, of course, for the younger people, look forward to you being part of that connection and that journey in the service of our people and the people in general.
Thank you all so much for those insights. I think personally for me, that was really inspiring, and also along the same lines as our past conversations, a call to action to really step up. So we're going to stop the recording at this point because we really wanted to get into the more intimate conversation.